One issue that will certainly be concentrating the minds of China's political representatives as they meet over the next couple of weeks in Beijing is the topic of housing prices, and especially the situation in metropolises like Beijing and Shanghai, where soaring prices have pushed most young couples out of the market altogether. Data from Beijing Real Estate Industry Association shows that in 2012, the average price of a new house in Beijing was over $300 per square foot. Meanwhile, according to the Shanghai Bureau of Statistics, the figure there was $15 higher still. But of course, those are averages across different areas in the cities. In the more expensive downtown areas, housing prices were often many-fold higher. Now, here on China Take, one regular topic of heated discussion and debate amongst Chinese net users is the difficulty of buying a house for ordinary people, while multimillionaire speculators, or those with the right connections, reap the rewards of the booming housing market. This simmering indignation has once again begun to boil after news of a CBS 60-minute special on China's housing market. Now, the show talked to two tycoons of the Chinese real estate industry. These were Wang Shi, chairman of the Vanke Group, that's China's biggest residential developer, and Jiang Xin, that's the CEO of Soho China, where she and her husband, chairman of Soho, Pan Shai, focus on developing high-profile branded commercial properties, usually in central Beijing and Shanghai. Now, Wang said he felt that there is a bubble in the Chinese real estate market and that if it bursts, it will be a disaster. Jiang simply said she felt the boom times in residential property development in China had come to an end. Both the interviews and the 60 Minutes show discussing the industry have been widely discussed in China's online community. So to hear net users' thoughts on the show and the country's real estate sector, let's now join our researcher Esther Dung in the newsroom. Right, Esther, it seems plenty of net users have watched the 60 Minutes feature, or at least are aware of what was said in the programme. What are they saying about it?
Well, as you've just said, this show has been seen by lots of people, most through subtitled uploads available on video sharing sites in China. And I have to say, a lot were quite impressed by it. This response from Xi Zhiyang is fairly typical. I suggest Chinese people watch this show. The US journalists' reports are much more in-depth than ours. And Gu 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 shares his or her thoughts on the good and the bad of the show, writing on Weibo.com. First, I often go to the New District area in the east of Zhengzhou, which features in the 6 Minutes report. And I have to say that while there are indeed plenty of empty houses there, it's not as bad as the reporters implied. Second, I feel Wang Shi had a difficulty in making himself understood in English, and he was tripping over himself not to make remarks that might offend the Chinese authorities. Lastly, I'm so happy to see a foreign media report on our real estate industry. And Wang Qixian has this short compliment addressed to Zhang Xin. She is a very smart woman and certainly created some good positive PR publicity for her company. And as for the theme of this show, whether there actually is a bubble in the Chinese real estate sector, well, there's quite a bit of heated debate among net users. The majority of them, like 让我发一个 from Zhejiang, firmly believe the bubble does exist. There is a bubble, and I hope it bursts as soon as possible. Look, even in my hometown, a small county, housing prices have multiplied over 10 times in the past decade, but our salaries have remained almost the same. While some others argue that the situation is far more complex than that. For example, this poster named 华尔街叛徒 has this question. I believe there is a bubble in some areas of the Chinese real estate industry, but it's not in less developed third-tier cities because the bubble has already burst there. And in the first-tier cities, there's no bubble at all. So on what grounds can CBS arrive at the conclusion that China is experiencing probably the biggest real estate bubble in history?
Okay, so not complete agreement on the real estate bubble theory, but if, as you said, the majority of net users think there is a bubble, then how do they explain these ever-increasing lines to invest in property in many areas of China? Enough of these people are buying second, third, in some cases even 10th houses.
Well, in answer to this question, plenty of posters I've seen point out that it's mainly down to lack of choice. Because if you have money to invest in China, there's not much apart from the real estate sector. If you want reasonable returns and relatively low risk, listen to this take post on Yahoo.com. In China, there are mainly 3 ways for people to grow their money. First is to save in the bank. That's safe but unprofitable. And when inflation is taken into account, your cash will become worth less and less in the bank. Second choice is to invest in the stock market, but that's unpredictable and risky, unless you are in the know. And the third option is to buy houses. So far, housing prices in China have kept rising, and people consider it the best way to keep and increase their wealth. And this poster from Inner Mongolia certainly seemed to buy that, has this to say on 163.com. It's an irreversible trend that housing prices in China will keep increasing. Those who don't buy houses are fools. But apart from these profit-based motives, I've also seen lots of people who point out that this is also related to something deep in the Chinese psyche and the traditional concepts of owning one's own houses. One typical example of this type is a poster called Horseman on xmfish.com. For lots of Chinese people, having a family as soon as possible is extremely important. But without the security of their own house, they won't feel that the family is really complete. For this reason, they will spare no effort or sacrifice to buy their own houses.
Okay, finally, Esther, the Chinese government recently announced a number of regulations aimed at cooling down the market in those so-called 5 measures from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development that include, most controversially, that new sales tax on the sale of primary residences of 20%. Do net users feel that these will have some practical effect?
Well, based on the comments I've seen, the majority of net users have doubts about the government's real sincerity in trying to control housing prices. This rather blunt comment from Hui Erfeng is fairly typical. The problem is that the decision makers are exactly those who own lots of houses themselves. On the other hand, Xu Andi has this more supportive observation on Sina.com. Housing prices in China are too high, sure, but I don't think the market will collapse as happened in the US. I still believe the Chinese government has a strong ability to regulate housing prices as long as they are really determined to do something. Finally, I'd like to share this comment from a poster based in the city of Wuhu, one of those 3rd-tier cities we heard mentioned earlier. There have been so many regulations and policies brought in aimed at controlling housing prices. But the prices just go up and up. But the government controls land sales, which are a main source of fiscal revenue. And the developers control the whole construction process, and little information is made public. If there is no change in both these areas, house prices will keep increasing as more and more people move to cities. And increasing the tax will only result in prices getting higher and higher.
Okay, thanks, Esther. And that was China Take researcher Esther Dung with reaction to that CBS 60 Minutes special report on the real estate sector in China and whether or not it's a bubble that's likely to burst. Next here on China Take, some of the top trending phrases on China's most popular search engines. Let's see what's got Chinese net users curious these days.